Today, we're going to dive into a piece of ancient wisdom that feels like it could have been written yesterday. We're exploring the book of James and what it has to say about, well, the most powerful and maybe most dangerous tool we all possess, the words we use every single day. You know this one, right? We've all said it, we've all heard it. It's the classic childhood comeback. The whole idea is that words are just air. They're harmless, especially when you compare them to actual physical things. But is that really true? Well, the writer we're looking at today, James, would say, no way. He argues that words are not harmless at all. In fact, he thinks they have this huge kind of terrifying power, enough to steer your entire life or, yeah, even burn the whole thing down. So to really get this pretty radical view on words, we need to back up a little. Who exactly was this guy, James? And who is he even talking to? Let's get some context. Okay, so this James wasn't just some random follower. He was actually the half-brother of Jesus. But, and this is the wild part, he didn't believe in Jesus while he was alive. It took the resurrection to completely change his mind. After that, he became a total pillar in the Jerusalem church. But listen to how he introduces himself. Not with some fancy title, but simply as a bond servant of God. Talk about humility. And you have to remember who he's writing to. This isn't some philosophical essay for people with lots of free time. His audience was under massive pressure. These were Jewish believers who'd been forced out of their homes, scattered everywhere because of persecution. They were facing real-life trials and needed guidance that was practical, stuff they could actually use. You know, the letter's style is way less about complicated theology and way more about everyday wisdom. Someone once described it perfectly, I think, as the Old Testament book of Proverbs dressed up in New Testament clothes. It's just a super practical guide for how to live out your faith when life gets messy. It's direct, it's challenging, and it's all about action. Now, before we really get into the whole thing about the tongue, you got to understand the one big idea that drives this entire letter. Because for James, how you talk is directly connected to what you really believe. James comes up with this really powerful idea he calls a dead faith. What's that? It's a faith that's all talk. It's saying, oh yeah, I believe, but then your life, your actions show zero evidence of it. And James, he pulls no punches. He says that kind of faith is totally useless. It can't save anyone. Now, let's be super clear. James is not saying you have to do a bunch of good stuff to earn God's favor. Not at all. What he's saying is that if you have a real, living faith, it will naturally produce good works. It's like a healthy apple tree. It just produces apples. That's what it does. Your actions, and yep, your words, are just the proof of the kind of faith that's living inside you. Okay, so with all that as our foundation, now we can turn to the main event for this explainer. Chapter 3. And let me tell you, his teaching on the power of our speech is profound. And honestly, it's a little unsettling. And just to show you how big of a deal this was for James, get this. A staggering 43% of the verses in his entire letter are about speech, almost half the book. This clearly isn't just some side note for him. This is front and center. To explain how something so small can have so much power, James gives us 3 amazing pictures. First, think about a tiny piece of metal in a horse's mouth, a bit. It can turn that whole powerful animal. Or a small rudder on a huge ship can steer it through a storm. And, of course, a single tiny spark can set an entire forest on fire. The tongue, he says, is exactly like that. A small part of you with the power to direct your whole life and cause incredible destruction. And if you thought that was intense, well, James is just getting started. After explaining its power, he drops this bombshell. He says that no human, on their own, can tame the tongue. He calls it a restless evil full of deadly poison. I mean, wow, that's a pretty heavy description for something we use all day, every day. And here's the contradiction that just blows James's mind. He's looking at people and he's seeing this deep inconsistency. One minute, they're using their mouths to praise God, and the very next, they're using that same mouth to tear down another person, a person made in God's image. To James, this is just, it's not natural. It's like a freshwater spring suddenly bubbling up with salt water. It just shouldn't be possible. So, if the untamed tongue is the symptom, what's the actual disease? James says our words don't just appear out of thin air. They flow from a source deep inside us, a source he calls wisdom. And James lays out two completely different operating systems for life. On one side, you have earthly wisdom. This isn't about being smart. It's a way of life driven by bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. It leads to chaos. But then, on the other side, you have wisdom from above. And it's the total opposite. It's pure, it loves peace, it's gentle, and it's full of mercy and good things. So how can you tell which kind of wisdom is actually running the show in someone's life? James says it's simple. Just listen to them talk. Our words aren't random. They are the overflow of whatever wisdom has taken root in our hearts. In other words, our speech is a diagnostic tool. All right, so let's boil all this down. After this really intense look at our words, what's the big takeaway? What's the one thing James really wants us to get? It's this: our words act like a barometer, constantly giving a reading of our inner spiritual weather. For James, controlling your speech isn't just about being polite. It's one of the clearest signs of spiritual maturity and the true condition of your heart. Ultimately, our words make what's invisible on the inside visible on the outside. They literally open up a window, letting everyone, including ourselves, see what's really going on in there: our values, our secret motives, and the true state of our heart. So let's just quickly recap the crucial points from James chapter 3. First, your words have this crazy outsized power to either build a life up or tear it all down. Second, they are the real-world proof of whether your faith is living or dead. And third, they are a window that reveals the source code, the wisdom that's running your life. And that really just leaves us with one final, very personal question to think about. If James is right, if all of our words, the texts, the gossip, the encouragement, the complaints, if all of it is a direct window into our soul, what does that window reveal about you today?